The silver towers of Lorax gleamed in the morning light, their perfect geometric angles reflecting the mathematical precision that defined the civilization that built them. Inside the tallest spire, Professor K stared at the holographic equation that dominated the center of the circular chamber. His 4 eyes narrowed in concentration, the pupils adjusting as they had thousands of times before when examining this same problem. 300 years, he muttered to himself, running a long, thin finger through the glowing symbols. 300 years, and still we cannot solve it. The unified field equation hung in the air, beautiful and maddening. Generations of Loraxian mathematicians had dedicated their lives to solving it, each adding layers of complexity, each bringing the solution incrementally closer, yet never quite reaching it. The equation promised to unlock the secret to faster-than-light travel, a technology that would transform their civilization from a single system species to one that could touch the stars beyond their reach. K had spent 120 of his 150 years of life working on this problem. His predecessors had mapped most of the framework, and he had devoted his considerable intellect to refining their work, adding new variables and constants that accounted for quantum disturbances in subspace. Yet something remained missing, a key insight that eluded them all. "Professor, the delegates are arriving." The voice belonged to his assistant, Nexa, who stood respectfully at the entrance to the chamber. K nodded without turning. "I will join them shortly." The Intergalactic Mathematical Congress happened once every 10 orbits. Representatives from the 12 most mathematically advanced species in their corner of the galaxy would gather to share discoveries and collaborate on problems too vast for any single civilization. The Loraxians hosted this year's Congress, and K, as chief mathematician, would preside. With a sigh, he saved his latest calculations and left the equation hanging in the air. Perhaps one of the visiting mathematicians would see something he had missed. The Congress Hall buzzed with activity. Delegates of various forms moved about the space, some floating on gravity disks, others walking on legs numbering from 2 to 8. Communication devices translated the dozen languages being spoken, creating a hum of overlapping conversations. K took his place at the head of the great oval table, and the room gradually fell silent. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into sounds each species could understand. "Welcome to the 15th Intergalactic Mathematical Congress. I am honored by your presence and eager to begin our exchange of ideas." The formalities proceeded as they always did. Each delegation presented their mathematical advancements since the last Congress. The Vril had developed a new theorem on quantum probability. The Nexians had refined their work on 11-dimensional topology. The Glix had constructed a proof for the Tanbar conjecture that had stood for 50 years. When all delegations had presented, K rose once more. "As is tradition, I will now share Lorax's greatest ongoing challenge, the unified field equation." He gestured, and the massive equation appeared above the table, rotating slowly so all could examine it. "As you know, we have worked on this problem for generations. We believe we are closer than ever to a solution, but still, it eludes us." Murmurs of appreciation filled the room. Even among these advanced species, the complexity of the equation impressed. "I estimate we are still 20 to 30 years from completing it," K continued. "But when we do, it will revolutionize space travel. The energy requirements for faster-than-light travel will decrease by orders of magnitude. The stars truly will be within our grasp." An old Vril raised a thin appendage. "Have you considered the lambda approach to the central paradox?" "We have," K replied. "It led to a promising path, but ended in contradictions when applied to real space conditions. For hours, the mathematicians discussed the equation, suggesting approaches, identifying weaknesses, proposing alternatives. K noted each contribution carefully, but none offered the breakthrough he sought. As the session came to a close, a small commotion at the back of the hall caught his attention. A late arrival, unusual for this gathering of precise minds. "Forgive the interruption," said the coordinator, looking flustered. "We have just received word that a new species has arrived in our system. They call themselves humans." Ripples of curiosity moved through the assembly. Humans? Asked Kay. I am not familiar with this species. They are newly spacefaring, the coordinator explained. They have achieved interstellar travel using what they call fusion drives. Quite primitive, by our standards, but they have come a remarkable distance. Are they mathematically advanced? Asked a Nexian delegate. The coordinator looked uncertain. Their transmission included mathematical notation as a universal language. It seems basic, but functional. Kay found himself intrigued despite his focus on the Congress. Have they requested diplomatic contact? Yes, Professor, their ship will reach our orbit within 10 days. The Council has approved their visit and requests your presence as part of the welcoming delegation, given your status. Kay considered this. A new species was always interesting, though he doubted these newcomers would have anything to contribute to the grand problems that occupied Loraxian mathematics. Still, scientific curiosity was a core value of his people. I will attend, of course, he said. Now, shall we continue our discussion of the unified field equation? The delegates returned to the problem at hand, but an undercurrent of excitement remained. Most species in the Congress had known each other for centuries. A new intelligence, even a primitive one, offered novel perspectives. That evening, Kay returned to his private study. The equation filled his screens, the same as it had for decades. He made a few adjustments, tried a new approach to the quantum variance section, but found himself reaching the same dead end he had encountered months earlier. His mind kept wandering to the approaching human ship. He accessed the limited data they had shared, images of their world, basic details of their biology, examples of their mathematics. Their number system was simple, base 10, likely derived from counting their digits. Their mathematical notation seemed clumsy compared to the elegant systems used by the Congress species. Yet they had managed to cross the vast gulf between stars with such limited tools. There was something admirable in that. Kay turned back to the equation, staring at the section that had resisted solution for so long. Sometimes he wished for a fresh perspective, an entirely new way of seeing the problem. His species excelled at iterative improvements, at refining and perfecting existing approaches. But perhaps what the equation needed was something else. A conceptual leap rather than incremental advancement. He dismissed the thought. The Loraxian approach had solved countless difficult problems before. This one would yield eventually, with enough time and effort. The humans and their visit would be an interesting diversion, nothing more. As he prepared to rest for the night, Kay saved his work and shut down the holographic display. The equation disappeared, but never truly left his mind. It would be there, when he awoke, as it had been every day for over a century. Little did he know that the approaching human ship carried someone who would change everything he understood about his life's work. The human ship entered orbit around Lorax with none of the precision typical of interstellar vessels. It wobbled slightly, corrected course twice, and finally settled into a stable position that made the Loraxian traffic controllers wince. Professor, Kay watched from the observation deck of the orbital platform, his 4 eyes tracking the ungainly craft. Remarkable that they made it this far, commented Council Member Trell, who stood beside him. Their propulsion technology is centuries behind ours. Kay nodded. Yet they are here. There must be something interesting about these humans. The ship was called the Earth Star, according to the transmission data. It was hardly beautiful by Loraxian standards, a bulky cylinder with protruding modules and visible weld lines. No mathematical elegance, no perfect ratios in its construction, just functional engineering. They're requesting docking permission, said the platform controller. Their approach vector is unconventional. Guide them in carefully, ordered Trell. We don't want an accident during first contact. After 30 minutes of careful maneuvering, the human ship connected to the docking port with a heavy clunk that vibrated through the platform. Kay and the welcoming delegation waited as the airlock cycled and pressure equalized. The inner door slid open, and the humans stepped through. There were 5 of them, dressed in matching blue uniforms with different colored stripes on their shoulders. They stood on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and a single head with 2 eyes, far simpler in design than most species Kay had encountered. Their skin tones varied from light to dark brown, and the hair on their heads differed in color and length. One in front stepped forward. "Greetings from Earth and the United Space Initiative. I'm Captain Jack Miller of the Earth Star." His words came through Kay's translator with only a slight delay. Kay moved forward and performed the traditional Loraxian greeting gesture. "Welcome to Lorax. I am Professor Kay, Chief Mathematician and Representative of the Council of Sciences. Captain." Miller smiled, a facial expression the Loraxians had studied in the preliminary data. "It's an honor to meet you, Professor. We've traveled a long way for this moment." "Indeed. 300 light years, if our calculations are correct." 312, actually," Miller said. "Took us 11 months in cryosleep. Not the fastest way to travel, but it's what we've got." Kay found the captain's directness refreshing. Most species engaged in lengthy ceremonial exchanges before acknowledging practical matters. The formal introductions continued. Besides Miller, the human delegation included their science officer, communications specialist, medical officer, and engineering chief. Each showed different mannerisms and speech patterns, more individual variation than Kay was accustomed to seeing in other species. "We've prepared accommodations suited to your biology," Trell told the humans, "and we've arranged a welcome ceremony to introduce you to our culture." "We appreciate your hospitality," Miller replied. "We've brought gifts from Earth as well." The gifts were simple but thoughtful: samples of human art, music recordings, books translated into standard galactic code, and foods preserved for the journey. The Loraxian delegation accepted them with proper ceremony, though Kay noticed the humans seemed somewhat impatient with the formal protocols. The welcome ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of Mathematics, Lorax's most prestigious cultural center. The vast chamber featured displays of the planet's mathematical achievements throughout its history, culminating in a massive holographic representation of the unified field equation that dominated the central area. Kay watched Miller during the tour. While the other humans politely observed the displays, the captain kept looking back at the great equation with unusual intensity. "You seem interested in our greatest challenge, Captain," Kay said, moving to stand beside him. Miller nodded. "I am. Before I joined the space program, I taught mathematics at a university on Earth." This surprised Kay. "You were a mathematician, yet you command a vessel?" "I'm both," Miller smiled. "On Earth, people often change careers. I loved teaching, but I wanted adventure too. When the opportunity came to explore beyond our solar system, I couldn't resist." Kay found this concept strange, the idea of abandoning one specialized field for another. On Lorax, one chose a discipline and perfected it throughout one's life. "Would you like to know more about the equation?" Kay offered, feeling unexpectedly eager to discuss his life's work with this curious human. "I would," Miller said with genuine enthusiasm. Kay led him to the central display and began explaining. "This is the unified field equation. It represents our attempt to reconcile quantum mechanics with gravitational physics in a way that would allow for efficient manipulation of space-time." "For faster-than-light travel," Miller said, nodding. "Precisely. We've worked on it for 300 years. I personally have dedicated 120 years to its solution." Miller's eyes widened. "You're over 120 years old?" "I am 150 of your Earth years," Kay said. "Our species typically lives to about 200. "That's remarkable," Miller said. "No wonder you've made such progress on complex problems. Our average lifespan is just under 100 years now, and most mathematicians only have 40 or 50 productive years." Kay felt a flicker of sympathy. Such short lives. How could they accomplish anything significant? "May I ask a question about this section?" Miller pointed to a complex cluster of symbols in the equation's center. "Of course. That represents the quantum fluctuation parameters in 11-dimensional space." Miller frowned slightly. "And these variables here control for the energy requirements?" "Yes. That's been one of our greatest challenges. The theoretical energy needed for faster-than-light travel is enormous. We've reduced it by a factor of 10,000 over the centuries, but it's still beyond our production capabilities." The human captain stared at the equation with surprising intensity. His eyes moved rapidly across the symbols, and he occasionally muttered something too quiet for Kay's translator to catch. "Have you considered—" Miller began, then stopped himself. "No, sorry, I shouldn't presume to offer suggestions on work you've spent lifetimes developing." Kay felt a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "Please, Captain, feel free to share your thoughts. We value fresh perspectives, even if they come from less mathematically advanced species." He tried to phrase this diplomatically. Miller smiled, but there was something in his expression Kay couldn't interpret. "It's probably nothing, just an odd parallel to some work we did on Earth with fusion containment fields." Before Kay could inquire further, Council Member Trell approached. "The banquet is ready to begin, Professor. Captain Miller, would you and your crew join us?" The moment passed. Miller nodded and rejoined his crew, but Kay noticed how the humans' eyes lingered on the equation until they left the hall. The banquet proceeded according to Loraxian tradition. 17 courses, each representing a fundamental mathematical concept, served in precise sequence. The humans seemed overwhelmed by the formality, but made genuine efforts to appreciate the cultural significance. During the meal, Kay found himself seated beside Miller again. "Tell me, Captain, how did humanity develop interstellar travel with your level of mathematics?" He tried to ask this without sounding condescending. Miller took a sip of the blue Loraxian beverage before answering. "We're practical problem solvers, Professor. We may not have your theoretical elegance, but we're good at finding workable solutions. Sometimes being limited forces you to think differently." Kay considered this. An interesting perspective, but surely elegant theory leads to better practical solutions in the end. "Not always," Miller said. "Sometimes the perfect solution isn't necessary. Sometimes good enough gets you where you need to go while the perfect solution is still being calculated." There was wisdom in these words that Kay found unexpectedly compelling. The conversation shifted to other topics: Earth's culture, Loraxian history, the differences between their educational systems. As the evening ended and the humans prepared to return to their temporary quarters, Miller approached Kay one final time. "Professor, would it be possible for me to study your unified field equation in more detail? I find it fascinating, even if it's far beyond my capabilities." Kay felt pleased by the human's interest. "Of course, I can arrange for you to access our public mathematical archives tomorrow." "Thank you," Miller said, then hesitated before adding, "Sometimes a new set of eyes can see things differently, even if they don't see as much." As the humans departed, Kay found himself thinking about Miller's words. The captain was clearly intelligent, even if his species' mathematics was primitive by Loraxian standards. There was something refreshing about his approach, a directness and creativity that contrasted with the methodical precision of Loraxian thought. Still, the idea that a human could contribute anything meaningful to the unified field equation seemed absurd. The equation had challenged the finest minds of 12 advanced species for centuries. What could a newcomer possibly see that they had all missed? Kay dismissed the thought and turned his attention to preparations for tomorrow's formal presentation to the Mathematical Congress. Yet as he reviewed his notes that night, he found his mind returning to the human captain and the curious intensity in his eyes when he looked at the equation. Captain Jack Miller couldn't sleep. The quarters provided by the Loraxians were comfortable enough. They had carefully researched human requirements for temperature, gravity, and air composition. The bed was surprisingly suitable for his human frame. Yet sleep wouldn't come. The equation haunted him. He sat up and switched on the small light beside his bed. The clock on the wall, adjusted to Earth time, showed 3:17 a.m. His crew would be asleep for hours yet. Jack rubbed his eyes and reached for the data tablet the Loraxians had provided, containing information about their culture, history, and scientific achievements. He navigated to the section on the unified field equation again. "Computer," he said quietly. "Activate personal log, private entry." The tablet beeped in acknowledgement. "I can't stop thinking about their equation," Jack began. "It's beautiful work. Generations of brilliant minds building on each other's insights. But there's something off about their approach." He paused, collecting his thoughts. When I taught at MIT, I was always the odd one out in the department. Too intuitive, they said. Not rigorous enough. But I could see patterns that others missed because they were too focused on following established methods. Jack stood and began pacing the room, the tablet still recording. The Loraxians have built this massive mathematical structure, layer upon layer of complexity. But what if the solution isn't about adding more complexity? What if it's about stepping back and seeing a simpler pattern? He stopped pacing and stared out the small window at the unfamiliar stars. I need to work this through. Computer, can you interface with the ship's main system? Connection established, the tablet replied. Good. I need to run some calculations. Display the unified field equation, please. The holographic display activated, projecting the massive equation into the air of his quarters. Jack studied it, walking around the projection to view it from different angles. Let me try something, he muttered. Remove all variables related to the 11-dimensional quantum fluctuations. The equation shifted, large sections disappearing. Now remove the gravitational compensation factors for scales smaller than 1 nanometer. More sections vanished. Interesting. What if the solution isn't about accounting for every possible quantum fluctuation? What if it's about finding the, pattern that makes those fluctuations irrelevant? Jack's mind drifted back to his days at university. He had always been fascinated by historical approaches to mathematics, the elegant solutions found by ancient mathematicians with limited tools. Sometimes the constraints of their knowledge had forced creative insights that modern methods overlooked. Computer, display Earth's historical approach to fluid dynamics, specifically the Navier-Stokes approximations. A new set of equations appeared beside the Loraxian work. Now overlay them, matching conceptual similarities. The computer processed for a moment, then merged the displays. Patterns began to emerge. That's it, Jack whispered. They're trying to solve for every variable, but there's a pattern here that makes most of those variables cancel each other out. His excitement growing, Jack grabbed a stylus and began marking up the holographic display, drawing connections and writing new formulations. Hours passed unnoticed as he worked, fueled by the thrill of discovery. The memories of his academic career flashed through his mind, the frustration of colleagues who couldn't see what seemed obvious to him, the department head who suggested he might be better suited to applied work, rather than pure mathematics. The disappointment when his unconventional paper on pattern recognition and prime number distribution was rejected by major journals. That rejection had pushed him toward the space program. If the academic world wouldn't appreciate his approach to mathematics, perhaps exploration would offer different opportunities. Now, billions of miles from Earth, he found himself facing the ultimate mathematical challenge, one that had stumped an entire civilization of mathematical geniuses for centuries. What if, Jack muttered, staring at a particular section of the equation, what if the relationship isn't additive but multiplicative? Not A plus B plus C, but A times B times C. He made the adjustment in the equation and suddenly, entire sections simplified dramatically. Computer, calculate the energy requirements using this modified approach. The system hummed as it processed the complex calculations. Energy requirement. Reduced by factor of 1012, the computer finally reported. Jack stared in disbelief. That can't be right. Run it again with full error checking. After another minute of processing, the computer confirmed. Verification complete. Energy requirement. Reduced by factor of 10 to 12 from the Loraxian baseline model. If this was correct, it meant faster than light travel would require less energy than a standard fusion reactor produced. It would make interstellar travel not just possible but practical. I need to check this another way, Jack said, unwilling to trust such a revolutionary result without verification. He spent the next hour approaching the problem from different angles, looking for flaws in his reasoning. Each test confirmed his initial finding. The solution wasn't in adding more complexity to account for quantum fluctuations, it was in recognizing a pattern that made those fluctuations irrelevant at the macro scale. The approach was almost embarrassingly simple compared to the Loraxians' elaborate constructions. They had been so focused on precision and completeness that they had missed a fundamental pattern. As the first light of Lorax's sun began to filter through his window, Jack sat back, Exhausted but exhilarated, he had done it. He had solved the equation that had stumped an entire civilization for centuries, and he had no idea how to tell them. How would Professor K react to learning that his life's work, 120 years of dedicated study, had been essentially solved overnight by a member of a primitive species? The political implications alone were staggering. The Loraxians held their position in the Intergalactic Mathematical Congress largely due to their work on this equation. What would it mean for them if a newcomer casually solved their greatest challenge? Jack rubbed his tired eyes. He needed to approach this carefully. He couldn't simply announce that he had solved their grand problem. That would seem arrogant, and might be dismissed without consideration. He needed to lead them to see the solution themselves, to help them reach the insight that would validate his approach. A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. "Captain Miller? Are you awake?" It was Dr. Levine, his science officer. Jack quickly saved his work and shut down the holographic display. "Yes, come in." The door slid open, and Levine entered, already dressed in her uniform. "I wanted to check if you were ready for the tour of the mathematical archives this morning. It's scheduled to begin in an hour." Jack glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. He had been working for over 4 hours without realizing it. "I'll be ready," he assured her, then hesitated. "Laura, can I ask you something? If you discovered something that would completely change another culture's understanding of their own field of expertise, how would you present it to them?" Levine gave him a curious look. "That's an unusual question. I suppose I would be very careful about how I framed it. No one likes to have their fundamental assumptions challenged, especially by an outsider." She studied his face. "Did you discover something in their mathematical archives?" Jack smiled tiredly. "Just a theoretical question. Thinking about cross-cultural, scientific exchange." She didn't seem entirely convinced, but nodded. "We should be diplomatic. Remember, we're representing Earth. The Loraxians have been hospitable, and we don't want to appear ungrateful or presumptuous." "Absolutely right," Jack agreed. "I'll get ready for the tour." After Levine left, Jack looked once more at the saved calculations on his tablet. The solution was there, elegant in its simplicity. The question now was how to share it without causing offense or disruption. He showered and dressed in his uniform, his mind still racing with mathematical formulas and diplomatic concerns. By the time he joined his crew in the common area of their quarters, he had formed a plan. He would use the tour of the mathematical archives to ask questions, carefully framed questions that might lead Professor K toward the insight himself. If that didn't work, he would have to be more direct. But one way or another, he couldn't keep this discovery to himself. The solution to the unified field equation could transform space travel for all species, including humanity. The potential benefits were too great to ignore, due to concerns about hurt feelings or cultural pride. As Jack led his crew toward the meeting point where Professor K waited to begin the tour, he felt the weight of his discovery pressing on him. The next few hours would be crucial. He would need all his diplomatic skill and mathematical insight to navigate this situation successfully. Professor K waited at the entrance to the mathematical archives, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of anticipation in Loraxian body language. When Captain Miller and his crew arrived, K noted the human captain looked tired, with darkened areas under his eyes. "Did you not rest well, Captain Miller?" K asked as they exchanged greetings. Jack smiled faintly. "I was too fascinated by what I learned yesterday. Your mathematical achievements kept my mind busy." K felt pleased by this response. The human's interest in Loraxian mathematics seemed genuine, even if his understanding must necessarily be limited. "Today you will see our greatest treasures," K said, leading the group into the massive circular building. The archives contain the original work of every major Loraxian mathematician for the past 1,000 years. The humans gazed in wonder as they entered the main hall. Crystal data storage units lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each containing the complete works of a mathematical master. The center of the room featured a large round table with embedded holographic projectors. "This is amazing," said Dr. Levine, the human science officer. "How do you organize all this knowledge?" "By mathematical field, then chronologically," Kay explained. "The most recent work is on the upper levels." The tour proceeded through the various sections of the archives. Kay explained the significance of key mathematical breakthroughs that had shaped Loraxian science and technology. The humans asked intelligent questions, showing more understanding than Kay had expected from their species. Throughout the tour, he noticed Captain Miller growing increasingly distracted. The human kept glancing at the displays related to the unified field equation, and several times began to speak, only to stop himself. When they reached the section dedicated to the current research on the equation, Kay gestured proudly to the latest additions. "These represent my own contributions over the past 20 years. We have refined the quantum variance calculations to unprecedented precision." Miller stepped forward, studying the equations with unusual intensity. "Professor Kay, may I ask what might seem like a simple question?" "Of course, Captain. Why did your mathematicians choose to approach the problem through an 11-dimensional model rather than simplifying to 5 dimensions?" Kay blinked in surprise. The question showed more understanding than he had anticipated. "The 11-dimensional approach allows us to account for all quantum fluctuations at the subatomic level. A simplified model would lose precision." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "And precision is the primary goal?" "Naturally," Kay replied. "Without absolute precision, the equation would be useless for practical applications." Miller seemed to consider this carefully before asking, "What if absolute precision isn't necessary? What if there's a pattern that makes those fluctuations statistically irrelevant at the macro scale?" The question struck Kay as odd. That would contradict our fundamental understanding of space-time mechanics. Every quantum fluctuation must be accounted for. Miller looked like he wanted to say more, but glanced at Dr. Levine, who gave him a warning look. The human captain simply nodded and moved on with the tour. After completing their circuit of the archives, Kay brought the group to the central table. "Now I have arranged for a special demonstration. This projector can display any mathematical work in our collection for collaborative study." He activated the system, and the unified field equation appeared above the table, rotating slowly. "I thought you might enjoy seeing the complete equation in its current form." Miller stared at the equation, then looked directly at Kay. "Professor, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I've been thinking about your equation all night. Would it be possible to test a different approach?" Kay felt a mixture of amusement and curiosity. The human's presumption was almost endearing. "What did you have in mind, Captain?" Miller stepped forward hesitantly. "May I?" He gestured to the control panel. Kay nodded, expecting a basic question or perhaps a misunderstanding of the equation's fundamentals. Miller began to manipulate the equation display, simplifying sections and rearranging terms. His fingers moved with surprising confidence across the Loraxian interface. "If we look at the equation through the lens of pattern recognition rather than absolute precision," Miller explained as he worked, "we can see that these quantum fluctuations follow a predictable distribution." Kay watched with growing concern as the human drastically simplified his life's work. "Captain, I appreciate your interest, but this approach removes critical elements needed for accurate—" "Please, just give me one more minute," Miller said, his focus intense. "What if instead of treating each quantum fluctuation as a discrete variable, we treat them as a statistical distribution with predictable properties?" To Kay's astonishment, Miller transformed the massive equation into a much simpler form. The elegant simplicity of it was shocking, beautiful in a way Kay had never considered. "Now, if we calculate the energy requirements using this model," Miller continued, instructing the system to run the calculations. The result appeared above the table. Energy requirement reduced by factor 10^12. Silence fell over the room. The Loraxian assistants who had been guiding the tour stared in disbelief. Kay's 4 eyes widened to their maximum aperture. "That's impossible," he finally said. "The system must have a computational error." "Run it again," Miller suggested gently. "Test it however you need to." Kay immediately began a series of verification procedures, his long fingers flying across the control panel. Each test confirmed Miller's result. The simplified approach reduced the energy requirements for faster-than-light travel to a level that was actually achievable with current technology. "This cannot be correct," Kay insisted, his voice tinged with distress. 300 years of work by our greatest minds." Miller's expression showed genuine sympathy. "Professor, your work wasn't wrong. It was necessary to understand the problem fully. Without it, I couldn't have seen the pattern." The other humans stood awkwardly to the side, sensing the gravity of the moment. Dr. Levine stepped forward and placed a hand on Miller's shoulder, murmuring something the translator didn't catch. Kay felt as though the floor beneath him had vanished. If this human was correct, and the calculation suggested he was, then the work Kay had dedicated his life to had been solved in a single night by a member of a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. "I need to inform the Council," Kay said stiffly. "And the Congress delegates." Miller nodded. "I understand, and I apologize if I've caused any distress. That wasn't my intention." Kay struggled to process his feelings. On one level, he felt devastated. 120 years of work, seemingly, made irrelevant overnight. On another level, his scientific curiosity was captivated by the elegant solution. The mathematician in him recognized the beauty of Miller's approach. "How did you see it?" Kay asked, his voice quieter now. "What made you look at the problem differently?" Miller considered the question carefully. "On Earth, I was often criticized for being too intuitive in my approach to mathematics. But when resources are limited, when you don't have centuries to solve a problem, you look for shortcuts, for patterns that might let you skip steps." The explanation was both simple and profound. The Loraxians had never needed to look for shortcuts. With their long lifespans and methodical approach, they had always assumed that more precision, more complexity, would eventually yield the solution. Kay looked at the simplified equation again. "The Council of Mathematicians will need to verify this independently. I will arrange a presentation for tomorrow." "Of course," Miller agreed. "I'm happy to explain my approach to anyone who wants to understand it." As they left the archives, Kay found himself walking beside Miller, slightly separated from the others. "Captain," he said quietly, "if your solution proves correct, it will change everything we thought we knew about space-time mechanics." Miller nodded. "Scientific revolutions often come from unexpected directions." "And what will your people do with this discovery?" Kay asked, suddenly concerned about the implications of giving such powerful knowledge to a young species. Miller seemed to understand the worry behind the question. "The same thing we hope your people will do, use it to explore, to learn, to connect with others. Earth has no interest in conquest, Professor. We're too busy trying to understand the universe." Kay wanted to believe him. The human seemed sincere, and there was something about his approach to knowledge, his willingness to challenge assumptions, to see patterns where others saw only complexity, that resonated with the fundamental Loraxian value of truth-seeking. As they parted ways, Kay headed immediately to the council chambers. He needed to report this development and begin preparing for tomorrow's presentation. His mind raced with implications, scientific, cultural, political. The unified field equation had defined his life. Now, its solution would define his legacy, and that solution had come from the most unexpected source imaginable. A human captain who had once been a mathematician, who looked at problems differently because his species didn't have the luxury of time. The grand hall of the Loraxian Science Academy had never been so crowded. Representatives from all 12 species of the Intergalactic Mathematical Congress filled the tiered seating, their varied forms creating a colorful tapestry of alien life. The central stage held a large holographic projector, where Captain Jack Miller stood beside Professor Kay, both looking slightly uncomfortable for very different reasons. "We call to order this special session of the Congress," announced Elder Vex, the ancient Loraxian who served as head of the Council of Sciences. "We have gathered to witness a presentation regarding the unified field equation, which has been the focus of our collective efforts for generations." Murmurs spread through the assembly. The sudden announcement of a special session had created a buzz of speculation throughout the scientific community. Some had heard rumors of a breakthrough, but few knew the details or the source. Elder Vex continued, "Professor K will introduce our guest presenter." K stepped forward, his four eyes blinking in the deliberate rhythm that Loraxians use to indicate formal speech. He had spent a sleepless night verifying Miller's work with his most trusted colleagues. The results were undeniable, but the implications were still difficult to accept. "Esteemed colleagues," K began, "for 300 years, our civilization has dedicated its finest minds to solving the unified field equation. I myself have spent 120 years refining our approach, adding layers of precision to account for quantum fluctuations in 11 dimensions." The audience nodded in appreciation of this dedication. Yesterday, a new perspective was shared with me, a perspective so different from our own that at first I dismissed it as impossible, but after rigorous testing, I must acknowledge its validity. K gestured to Miller, who stood straighter in his blue uniform. "Captain Jack Miller of Earth has proposed a solution that fundamentally changes our understanding of the equation. I invite him to present his findings." The silence in the hall was absolute as Miller stepped forward. Kay could sense the skepticism among the delegates. How could a member of a newly spacefaring species solve what had stumped the greatest minds of 12 advanced civilizations? "Thank you, Professor K," Miller began, his voice calm despite the pressure. "I want to start by acknowledging the brilliant work done by Loraxian mathematicians over centuries. Without your meticulous research and precision, I could never have recognized the pattern that led to this solution." It was a diplomatic opening, and Kay appreciated the human's tact. Miller activated the holographic display, showing the full complexity of the unified field equation as it had existed yesterday. "This equation represents one of the greatest mathematical achievements I've ever encountered. Its precision is remarkable." Then he began to manipulate the display just as he had done in the archives. But when approaching the problem of faster-than-light travel, absolute precision may not be necessary. What if, instead of accounting for every quantum fluctuation individually, we treat them as a statistical distribution with predictable properties? The equation transformed before their eyes, sections collapsing into simpler forms, variables combining or canceling entirely. Some delegates leaned forward in their seats, others whispered urgently to their colleagues. By recognizing that these fluctuations follow patterns at the macro level, we can simplify the approach dramatically, Miller continued, moving confidently through his explanation. The result is a solution that requires vastly less energy to implement. He displayed the final calculations. The energy requirement reduced by a factor of 1 trillion, a practical, achievable level with current technology. This isn't just a theoretical exercise, Miller concluded. This makes faster-than-light travel possible now, not in some distant future. The hall erupted in sound, exclamations of disbelief, urgent questions, excited discussions. Elder Vex raised all 4 hands, for silence which gradually returned. "These claims are extraordinary," said a vril delegate rising from her seat. "Has this solution been verified?" "It has," Kay confirmed, stepping forward again. "I assembled a team of our leading mathematicians who worked through the night. We approached the problem from multiple angles and ran thousands of simulations. The results consistently support Captain Miller's solution." Another delegate, a floating spherical being from the Nexian system, moved forward. "How did a species with such limited mathematical development see what we all missed?" Miller smiled slightly. "With respect, it's precisely because of our limitations that we found this solution. On Earth, mathematicians don't have centuries to solve problems. Our lifespans are short, our resources limited. We're forced to look for patterns, for shortcuts." He gestured to the simplified equation. "This isn't about being smarter. It's about thinking differently. You sought perfect precision because you could afford to. We seek functional approximations because we must." Kay found himself nodding in agreement. There was profound wisdom in the human's words, a perspective he had never considered. "If I may," Kay addressed the assembly, I believe what we're witnessing is not the superiority of human mathematics, but the value of diversity in scientific thought. Different evolutionary paths, different cultural approaches, different constraints, all leading to unique ways of seeing the same problem. The delegates considered this, many indicating agreement in their species-specific ways. Elder Vex spoke again. If this solution proves practical, it will transform our understanding of space-time mechanics and revolutionize interstellar travel. The implications are profound for all our civilizations. Which brings us to an important question, said a tall, crystalline being from the outer systems. Who will control this technology? The humans? The Loraxians? The Congress as a whole? All eyes turned to Miller, who looked momentarily surprised by the question. On Earth, we believe knowledge of this importance belongs to everyone. We didn't come here to claim ownership of an idea. We came to establish friendship and exchange knowledge. He looked at Kay. I propose a joint development program, Loraxian precision combined with human intuition. Together we can turn this theoretical solution into practical technology faster than either of us could alone. Kay felt a profound sense of relief. The human wasn't trying to claim superiority or take control of the discovery. He was offering partnership. I support this proposal, Kay said firmly, and I volunteer to lead the Loraxian side of the collaboration. The months that followed transformed not just space travel, but the relationship between species across the known galaxy. The first prototype faster-than-light drive was built in a new joint facility established on Lorax's largest moon. Teams of Loraxian and human scientists worked side by side, each bringing their unique perspectives to the challenges of implementation. What had once seemed impossible, moving faster than light, became reality within a year. The maiden voyage of the test ship Unity, with Professor Kay and Captain Miller as co-commanders, traveled 10 light-years in under an hour, then safely returned. Kay found himself profoundly changed by the experience. His initial devastation, at having his life's work seemingly made irrelevant, had transformed into excitement about new possibilities. He and Miller had become not just colleagues but friends, each learning from the other's approach to science and to life. On the observation deck of the Unity after their successful test flight, Kay found Miller staring out at the stars. "What are you thinking, Jack?" Kay asked, using the human's first name as he had been invited to do. Miller smiled. "I'm thinking about an old saying from Earth. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Kay tilted his head, considering the metaphor. An apt description of scientific progress. "Your work made my insight possible," Miller said. "Without the precision of your approach, I would have had nothing to simplify, no pattern to recognize." Kay's 4 eyes blinked in the pattern that humans had learned meant appreciation. "And without your fresh perspective, we might have spent another century adding complexity without seeing the underlying pattern." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars that were now truly within reach. "The Council has approved expanding the joint program," Kay said eventually. "Representatives from all 12 Congress species will be joining us, along with more humans from Earth. They're calling it the Galactic Collaborative for Scientific Advancement." "A new era of cooperation," Miller nodded, "each species bringing its unique perspective to our shared challenges." Kay had lived 150 years, but he had never felt more excitement about the future than he did now. The universe had just become much smaller and infinitely more accessible. New civilizations would be discovered, new knowledge gained, new friendships formed, all because they had learned the most important equation of all, that different ways of thinking, when combined, could achieve what neither could accomplish alone. "I have a proposal for our next project," Kay said, turning to his human friend. "There's another equation we've struggled with for generations, a unified theory of consciousness. Perhaps it too could benefit from a fresh perspective." Miller grinned. "I know just the human philosopher who might help us with that one." As the Unity made its way back to Lorax, carrying news that would change the course of galactic history, Kay reflected on how quickly his understanding of the universe had expanded, not through the addition of complexity, but through the elegant simplicity of a new perspective. Sometimes the most profound truths were not the most complicated but the simplest. That was the axiom of simplicity, a principle that transcended species and would guide their shared future among the stars.